Graveyard shift. 2 a.m, Friday. Hall was sitting on the bench by the elevator, the only place on the third floor where a working Joe could catch a smoke, when Warwick came up. He wasn't happy to see Warwick. The foreman wasn't supposed to show up on 3 during the graveyard shift. He was supposed to stay down in his office in the basement, drinking coffee from the urn that stood on the corner of his desk. Besides, it was hot. It was the hottest June on record in Gates Falls, and the Orange Crush thermometer, which was also by the elevator, had once rested at 94 degrees at 3 in the morning. God only knew what kind of hellhole the mill was on the 3 to 11 shift. Hall worked the picker machine, a bulky gadget manufactured by a defunct Cleveland firm in 1934. He had only been working in the mill since April, which meant he was still making minimum $1.78 an hour, which was still all right. No wife, no steady girl, no alimony. He was a drifter, and during the last 3 years he had moved on his thumb from Berkeley, college student, to Lake Tahoe, busboy, to Galveston, stevedore, to Miami, short order cook, to Wheeling, taxi driver and dishwasher, to Gates Falls, Maine, picker machine operator. He didn't figure on moving again until the snow fell. He was a solitary person, and he liked the hours from 11 to 7 when the blood flow of the big mill was at its coolest, not to mention the temperature. The only thing he did not like was the rats. The third floor was long and deserted, lit only by the sputtering glow of the fluorescents. Unlike the other levels of the mill, it was relatively silent and unoccupied, at least by the humans. The rats were another matter. The only machine on 3 was the picker. The rest of the floor was storage for the 90-pound bags of fibre which had yet to be sorted by Hall's long gear-toothed machine. They were stacked like link sausages in long rows, some of them, especially the discontinued Meltons and irregular Slipes for which there were no orders, years old and dirty grey with industrial wastes. They made fine nesting places for the rats, huge fat-bellied creatures with rabid eyes and bodies that jumped with lice and vermin. Hall had developed a habit of collecting a small arsenal of soft drink cans from the trash barrel during his break. He pegged them at the rats during times when work was slow, retrieving them later at his leisure. Only this time Mr. Foreman had caught him, coming up the stairs instead of using the elevator like the sneaky son of a bitch everyone said he was. "What are you up to, Hall?" "The rats," Hall said, realizing how lame that must sound now that all the rats had snuggled safely back into their houses. "I peg cans at 'em when I see 'em." Warwick nodded once, briefly. He was a big, beefy man with a crew cut. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and his tie was pulled down. He looked at Hall closely. "We don't pay you to chuck cans at rats, mister. Not even if you pick them up again." "Harry hasn't sent down an order for 20 minutes, Hall answered, thinking, "Why couldn't you stay the hell put and drink your coffee?" "I can't run it through the picker if I don't have it." Warwick nodded as if the topic no longer interested him. "Maybe I'll take a walk up and see Wisconsin," he said. 5 to 1 he's reading a magazine while the crap piles up in his bins. Hall didn't say anything. Warwick suddenly pointed. "There's one! Get the bastard!" Hall fired the near-he-can he had been holding with one whistling overhand motion. The rat, which had been watching them from atop one of the fabric bags with its bright buckshot eyes, fled with one faint squeak. Warwick threw back his head and laughed as Hall went after the can. "I came to see you about something else," Warwick said. "Is that so?" "Next week's 4th of July week," Hall nodded. The mill would be shut down Monday to Saturday, vacation week for men with at least 1 year's tenure, layoff week for men with less than a year. "You want to work?" Hall shrugged. "Doing what?" "We're going to clean the whole basement level. Nobody's touched it for 12 years. Hell of a mess. We're going to use hoses." "The town zoning committee getting on the board of directors?" Warwick looked steadily at Hall. "You want it or not?" "2 an hour, double time on the 4th. We're working the graveyard shift because it'll be cooler." Hall calculated. He could clear maybe $75 after taxes, better than the goose egg he had been looking forward to. "All right. Report down by the dye house next Monday." Hall watched him as he started back to the stairs. Warwick paused halfway there and turned back to look at Hall. "You used to be a college boy, didn't you?" Hall nodded. "Okay, college boy, I'm keeping it in mind." He left. Hall sat down and lit another smoke, holding a soda can in one hand and watching for the rats. He could just imagine how it would be in the basement. The sub-basement, actually, a level below the dye house. Damp, dark, full of spiders and rotten cloth and ooze from the river. And rats. Maybe even bats, the aviators of the rodent family. Gah! Hall threw the can hard, then smiled thinly to himself as the faint sound of Warwick's voice came down through the overhead ducts, reading Harry Wisconski the Riot Act. "Okay, college boy, I'm keeping it in mind." He stopped smiling abruptly and butted his smoke. A few moments later, Wisconski started to send rough nylon down through the blowers, and Hall went to work. And after a while, the rats came out and sat atop the bags at the back of the long room, watching him with their unblinking black eyes. They looked like a jury. 11 p.m, Monday. There were about 36 men sitting around when Warwick came in wearing a pair of old jeans, tucked into high rubber boots. Hall had been listening to Harry Wisconski, who was enormously fat, enormously lazy, and enormously gloomy. "It's going to be a mess," Wisconski was saying when Mr. Foreman came in. "You wait and see, we're all going to go home blacker'n midnight in Persia." "Okay," Warwick said. "We strung 60 light bulbs down there, so it should be bright enough for you to see what you're doing. You guys," he pointed to a bunch of men that had been leaning against the drying spools, "I want you to hook up the hoses over there to the main water conduit by the stairwell. You can unroll them down the stairs. We got about 80 yards for each man, and that should be plenty. Don't get cute and spray one of your buddies, or you'll send him to the hospital. They pack a wallop." "Somebody'll get hurt," Wisconski prophesied sourly. "Wait and see." "You other guys," Warwick said, pointing to the group that Hall and Wisconski were a part of. "You're the crap crew tonight. You go in pairs with an electric wagon for each team. There's old office furniture, bags of cloth, hunks of busted machinery, you name it. We're going to pile it by the air shaft at the west end. Anyone who doesn't know how to run a wagon?" No one raised a hand. The electric wagons were battery-driven contraptions like miniature dump trucks. They developed a nauseating stink after continual use that reminded Hall of burning power lines. "Okay," Warwick said. "We got the basement divided up into sections and we'll be done by Thursday. Friday, we'll chain hoist the crap out. Questions?" There were none. Hall studied the foreman's face closely, and he had a sudden premonition of a strange thing coming. The idea pleased him. He did not like Warwick very much. "Fine," Warwick said. "Let's get at it." 2 a.m. Tuesday. Hall was bushed and very tired of listening to Wisconski's steady patter of profane complaints. He wondered if it would do any good to belt Wisconski. He doubted it. It would just give Wisconski something else to bitch about. Hall had known it would be bad, but this was murder. For one thing, he hadn't anticipated the smell. The polluted stink of the river, mixed with the odour of decaying fabric, rotting masonry, vegetable matter. In the far corner, where they had begun, Hall discovered a colony of huge white toadstools, poking their way up through the shattered cement. His hands had come in contact with them as he pulled and yanked at a rusty gear-toothed wheel, and they felt curiously warm and bloated, like the flesh of a man afflicted with dropsy. The bulbs couldn't banish the 12-year darkness. It could only push it back a little and cast a sickly yellow glow over the whole mess. The place looked like the shattered nave of a desecrated church, with its high ceiling and mammoth discarded machinery that they would never be able to move, its wet walls overgrown with patches of yellow moss, and the atonal choir that was the water from the hoses, running in the half-clogged sewer network that eventually emptied into the river below the falls. And the rats, huge ones that made those on Third look like dwarfs. God knew what they were eating down here. They were continually overturning boards and bags to reveal huge nests of shredded newspaper, watching with atavistic loathing as the pups fled into the cracks and crannies, their eyes huge and blind with the continuous darkness. "Let's stop for a smoke," Wisconski said. He sounded out of breath, but Hall had no idea why. He had been gold-bricking all night. Still, it was about that time, and they were currently out of sight of everyone else. "All right." He leaned against the edge of the electric wagon and lit up. "I never should have let Warwick talk me into this," Wisconski said dolefully. "This ain't work for a man, but he was mad the other night when he caught me in the crapper up on 4 with my pants up. Christ, was he mad." Hall said nothing. He was thinking about Warwick and about the rats. Strange how the two things seemed tied together. The rats seemed to have forgotten all about men in their long stay under the mill. They were impudent and hardly afraid at all. One of them had sat up on its hind legs like a squirrel until Hall had gotten in kicking distance, and then it had launched itself at his boot, biting at the leather. Hundreds, maybe thousands. He wondered how many varieties of disease they were carrying around in this black sumpole. And Warwick. Something about him. "I need the money," Wisconski said. "But Christ Jesus, buddy, this ain't no work for a man. Those rats." He looked around fearfully. "It almost seems like they think. You ever wonder how it'd be if we was little and they were big?" "Oh, shut up," Hall said. Wisconski looked at him, wounded. "Say I'm sorry, buddy. It's just that—" He trailed off. "Jesus, this place stinks," he cried. "This ain't no kind of work for a man." A spider crawled off the edge of the wagon and scrambled up his arm. He brushed it off with a choked sound of disgust. "Come on," Hall said, snuffing his cigarette. "The faster, the quicker." "I suppose," Wisconski said miserably. "I suppose." 4 a.m., Tuesday, lunchtime. Hall and Wisconski sat with 3 or 4 other men, eating their sandwiches with black hands that not even the industrial detergent could clean. Hall ate looking into the foreman's little glass office. Warwick was drinking coffee and eating cold hamburgers with great relish. "Ray Upson had to go home," Charlie Brochu said. "He puke?" someone asked. "I almost did." "Nah, Ray'd eat cow flop before he'd puke. Rat bit him." Hall looked up thoughtfully from his examination of Warwick. "Is that so?" he asked. "Yeah." Brochu shook his head. "I was teaming with him. Goddamnedest thing I ever saw. Jumped out of a hole in one of those old cloth bags. Must have been big as a cat. Grabbed onto his hand and started chewing." "Jesus," one of the men said, looking green. "Yeah," Brochu said. "Ray screamed just like a woman, and I ain't blaming him. He bled like a pig. Would that thing let go? No, sir. I had to belt it 3 or 4 times with a board before it would. Ray was just about crazy. He stomped it until it wasn't nothing but a mess of fur. Damnedest thing I ever saw. Warwick put a bandage on him and sent him home. Told him to go to the doctor tomorrow.